Alrighty, welcome to part 3 of A Lawless Time review. I'm going to be going through all the new cards, give you all my thoughts about them. This set continues to impress me, continues to have a lot of really interesting new like build around cards, new ways that I think are going to help improve deck building variety, and I'm really excited to get into it. Before we get going, please hit that subscribe button, and if you're interested in some more content from me, do check out my Patreon as well. All right, so the review here will go through all the cards revealed up until January 30th. We'll start with the new leaders, and then get into, bases and legendary cards, followed by the main bulk of new stuff. Should be real fun. Let's get to it. So the first new leader we have is a new Han Solo. I think we were mostly expecting to see another Han show up in this set. He is a Cunning Heroism 5-cost leader. With a frontside action that says exhaust, defeat a friendly token, deal 1 damage to a unit. So the tokens, of course, for this set are primarily going to be things like credits, but you can also blow up experience tokens, shields, any unit tokens you might get, like spies. You get a ping effect for that, but it's a pretty big cost, to be honest, because like blowing up a credit, which is worth a resource to deal 1 damage to a unit, might not be the best use of something like a credit. And same goes for most of the tokens we get, right? Maybe sometimes popping a shield on one of your own units to deal a damage could be board effective. Same with experience. But overall, I don't expect this ability to be like firing off all the time, unless there's some benefit outside of this to blowing up your tokens. For instance, if there's cards that say like when you sacrifice a credit or something, deal an extra damage, like things like that. I don't think we're going to get stuff like that, so mostly this ability does not look that powerful to me. On the flip, he's a 4/5. That's a pretty miserable stat line, to be honest, for a 5-flip leader. 5 health is really difficult to justify. He does have Saboteur, and he says on attack, defeat any number of friendly tokens, deal damage to a unit equal to the number of tokens defeated this way. So there's a few restrictions on this because, first of all, you can't deal damage to base, so you can't do like a super attack the way the new Darth Vader might be able to do. And you also can't spread the damage around, so if you did have multiple tokens, you can't like kill multiple units. All the token damage has to go into 1 unit. Yeah, it's like a bit of an upgraded version of his leader ability, but I don't love his leader ability. And like, are we really amassing that many tokens that by the time you flip on turn 4, you're going to be able to like kill a large unit, like sacrifice 4 tokens to kill like a 4 health unit? And at that point, would it even be worth sacrificing 4 tokens instead of doing something much more effective with them? Overall, I think this leader is actually like pretty bad, like definitely pretty bad. There's not much I can think of to do with this. I don't think it's going to be good and limited either. So, if you were kind of tired of seeing Han Solo everywhere, with the rotation of Han 1 and Han 2, it's going to leave mostly just the Jump the Lightspeed Pilot Han in terms of powerful Hans, and likely this one will not be generating many complaints. Next up, we have a new red villain leader. It's Sebulba, and pretty cool one. He's a 4-flip leader, so we got a new aggro flip leader, and he has an action, discard a card from your deck, so that means the top card of your deck goes into the discard pile, and it says a friendly unit gains raid 1 for this phase. Now, the ability to like use an action to pump a unit without the action sheet, right? The unit doesn't get to immediately attack, so you're just buffing a unit. That ability has kind of existed, and there's a very similar one with Von Reg, actually, who's also a 4-flip leader, where he's like use an action to play a vehicle and then buff something. It doesn't get used very often because the problem with an ability like this is that you're giving up an action, right? So your opponent can interact with the unit that you are buffing. Yeah, you're kind of like taking a chance by doing this. Should I attack for 3, or should I use this ability, give a unit raid, and hope that my opponent does nothing so that I can attack for 4? And usually the answer is you just do your attacks. But there is an interesting part here, and that is discarding a card from your deck is actually a synergistic theme there's going to be a couple cards that we see, especially Sebulba's Pod Racer, that can benefit from discarding cards from your deck, right? And in that sense, it is now enabling some other tools. So even if you're not using this to get the raid, or like you just do it at the end of your turn, you still can get some benefit from it. So the ability is not a complete dud. It has some use cases, and maybe it will provide you a few points of damage throughout a game. Just remember, because it's raid, if your opponent has a unit in play that can like interact with yours, then you can't really do it, right? Because you're not gaining any power, so they can still get their value trade. Now, it's a 4 flip, so it's going to obviously trend pretty aggro, and he's a 2/5 raid 1. So this is a very similar stat line actually to Sabine Wren from set 1. She was a 2/5 that dealt 1 damage to base on attack. Raid is mostly better than that because it's still going to attack for 3, with the one like situation where like if your opponent has sentinels and you really wanted to get that 1 damage to base, you can't do that. But overall, the stats are pretty competitive for a 5 flip. And he has on attack, discard a card from your deck. So his on attack is now just the like discard portion of his leader ability. He's not giving raid to anything. He just took the raid for himself. But it does still trigger all the effects that might care about discarding cards from your deck. I will say that like overall, it's a bit strange to me to include a leader like this in a set right after we had Dedra, who is also a 2/5 that gets raid. Hers is conditional. But they both, like, I think Dedra is also designed to be a pretty aggro leader. I know she has been seeing a little bit of play as a control leader. That probably won't continue, although it might, just because so much of, like, the blue control shell, especially event-based control stuff, is rotating out. But you now have 2 leaders that I think are in a lot of cases competing for, like, a very similar deck archetype, and they have very similar stats, and they do very similar, like, aggro-y stuff. So that part of it is like, okay, I guess one of these 2 is probably going to be better than the other. Not sure which one right now. I do like Sebulba's just generic raid, where I don't have to like game my hand, but I do like Dedra's leader ability better, because I actually find that having that 1-cost curve filling ability is pretty powerful. So we'll see. I think this could be good. I'm a little iffy so far on like what a ground-based like aggro, like villain aggro deck shell would look like. We're going to see some cards that certainly will be good in a ground-based villain aggro shell. The problem is I still see just so many good rate units being made that are defensive. For instance, Sentinels that are now not getting punished with stats, right? We've seen Captain Typho and Churret. This set, we've seen a new 2-cost Bodhi Rook. We have Obi-Wan, the 3-drop, right? So we have units with Sentinel all up and down the curve that don't seem to be getting lower stats for their Sentinel. The Sentinel just seems to kind of, in many cases, get tacked onto those units. And because of that, it makes these ground-based strategies specifically, because space, there's still a huge, like, miss in space Sentinels, but so space can still get there in the aggro stuff, and maybe Sebulba will have to play a decent amount of space units because of that. But there doesn't seem to be a lot to punish just like mid-rangey Sentinels for these ground-based aggro decks. And without like ECL doing a lot of the heavy lifting there, which is really what the ground-based aggro decks have been doing recently, I don't know what's going to happen if the rate of these aggro units will be good enough. I don't think it'll be like Sebulba's fault if he's not a good like aggro deck, because the leader is certainly sufficient, I think, to be a solid aggro leader. It's more that I don't know if the shell around it will work. And the last new leader for this week is the Client, and this is a Cunning villainy leader. He is a 5 flip, and he has an action, Exhaust. If you created a token this phase, exhaust an enemy unit. So this is a token, again, we talked about it. It's primarily going to be credits, but of course experience and shields count as tokens that you create, so do some units. A big major issue with this ability is that it doesn't trigger on the token creation, right? So you have to make the token, then your opponent gets an action, which means they're probably just going to attack with their best unit, and then you can exhaust something. So this ability will never, ever, ever exhaust the #1 target on your opponent's board, which is a huge issue for an ability like this. You compare that to Django, the band leader, right? His was a triggered ability, which means you could exhaust whatever you wanted, and here your opponent always gets that action. Secondly, if the condition here is not like super easy, of course you can probably make a deck that has a lot of shielded units. It might be the easiest way to like get this going, because then you're just playing on rate units, and then the next action you can exhaust something. But in the early few turns, you're probably just not even going to be able to use this ability, and if you are, it's going to be on your opponent's weakest unit on board. So I don't like it. When he flips, he's a 4/4 for 5 with shielded. I actually don't dislike those stats. If you think about the shield as maybe giving him 2 health or something, like blocking one small attack, then he's kind of flipping like a 4 or 6. You can like wrap your head around the fact that these stats aren't actually bad. And especially when there's like takedown isn't in the format. He's not getting like one shot by an event like that. He's on attack though. It's the same thing here as his other. It's on attack. If you create a token this phase, exhaust an enemy unit. Now when he does flip, he gets a shield, which means you have created a token that turn. But once again, it still takes an action, right? You have to flip first, and then your opponent can attack with their best unit, and then you can exhaust something. I think this was maybe a little too safe. Like the effect is just a little too safe. I think both of these effects just should have been triggered effects. Like a triggered action. If you created a token, you could exhaust to exhaust something, and same with his leader ability. When a token comes into play, and just make it once per turn. Like I think the big issue with Django was that it was unlimited exhausts, and like that was probably the biggest issue with him. Maybe there's more issues with him, but overall, because of the speed of this effect, I think it is not going to be good. All right, next up, the bases. So we have the last rare base, which is the yellow one. Now, we haven't seen a green rare base, but it was confirmed that the base taking up that slot is actually the green base that we see in the Java Spotlight deck, the one that searches up the Sarlacc. So we're not going to see a green rare base. So this is the last one. It's Citadel Research Center, the Cunning base, 26 health, like the other two. With an epic action that costs 1, return a friendly resource to its owner's hand if you do resource the top card of your deck. So it's 1 cost to draw a card, essentially. The card you draw is probably a little better than drawing a card, because you get your selection from all your resources. You of course can return the resource that you spend with this action to your hand, so you don't like get the second resource exhausted for your troubles. But you are giving up 4 health, right? So 4 health and 1 resource and an action to draw a card. Maybe a better than a card, right? Because it's, again, a selection. Is still a pretty hefty price for a base. The only way I could see this getting run is in hyper aggro decks, where you just do not expect to ever be the one in the base race situation. Because in those cases, sure, you're getting a free card on this base for that one resource, which you throughout a game will likely be able to find an opportunity to use on that card. So yeah, like the same way like Shadow Collective Camp, the base that was like when you flip your leader, you draw a card, like that never saw play because 25 health to draw a card once a game wasn't good enough. And that one actually came for free with your leader flip. Now here you're getting 26 health, but it's not coming for free. I find it unlikely that this will see much play, but of course I will try it in these hyper aggro decks to see if that card can make a difference. We also have the last, the reveals of the 3 common bases, the aspect cheating bases, Canto Bright, Stygian Spire, and Aldani Garrison. They're not new. We saw the blue one and we knew these were coming. They all say the exact same thing, where you can do an epic action to ignore 1 aspect penalty, non-heroic, non-villainy, right? Only from the 4 colors, 4 other colors. So there you are. If you were interested in what they looked like and the artwork, you can see that right there. All right, next up, we're going to get into the legendary cards, and the first one, which is an incredibly exciting card, is Max Rebo. He's a 4-cost command Cunning unit. He is a 2/7 underworld musician, and it says there is an additional regroup phase after the first regroup phase each round. All right, so there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, I will say, regardless of the power level of this card, I actually do think this is like a perfectly designed legendary. I don't think every legendary just needs to be like the best card in the game. This is like a very interesting build around style card, and it could be very powerful as well. So it's not just like build around and style without any substance. There is substance here, but this is I like legendaries like this too. So it's not all about just give me the best rate all the time. Let me unpack what this effect does first. So the regroup phase is the end of a turn. It's the part of the turn where both players draw 2 cards, then they may resource 1 card, and then they ready all their stuff, all their units, their leader, their resources, right? So that's the regroup phase. It is not the beginning of the next turn, it's the end of the current turn. By saying there's an additional regroup phase, what is basically happened is both players will draw 2 resource and then draw 2 resource, right? That we're getting a double draw, double resource turn. Now, it took me a little bit to even like wrap my head around what this means, and my man Ian told me that this basically means both players are skipping their next action phase, passing. Like, imagine you just decided to pass past the next action phase. I was like, wait, that's not exactly what it does. And no, it's not like exactly what it does, but it's like very, very similar to that, with the exception that your opponent can interact with Max Rebo before the regroup phase, in which case, no, you're not skipping those action phases. But kind of what's happening here is you are just skipping the next turn. You're just going, like, if you play this on the 4R turn, the next turn is just the 6R turn, and it's as though both players did, in fact, pass the 5R turn. They just both decided to not play any cards and just go draw 2 and resource again. Okay, so this is a symmetrical effect. So you're the one paying the resources for this unit. Your opponent doesn't pay the resources for this unit. And then you both get the benefits of this effect, or detriments, however you want to stack that, right? So where or when will an effect like this be more powerful for the person playing the card than the one on the other end? I think the number one place where that can be a big game changer is when you are playing, let's say, a 6 flip leader against a player playing a 5 deploy leader. Because by skipping the 5R turn, if you play this on 4R, on the third turn of the game, the 4 resource turn, you've now taken away what is, in fact, that player's most powerful turn in the game, which is their leader deploy turn. You've basically said, pass, and your opponent just passed through their leader deploy turn, and you went straight to the 6R turn, which is now your leader deploy turn. And now you're both going to be able to deploy this turn, but your leader should be better than their leader, and their deck should be tailored around capitalizing on their 5 resource deploy turn. That's probably the most like straightforward way that this card can be incredibly valuable. Other ways, of course, is you are simply playing the much bigger deck, and you can make use of these resources and ramp more, right? You skip 1 turn, and you both draw 2 and resource 2. If it lives again, it's like you're skipping the next turn. You go from 4 to 6 to 8. If your opponent's playing like a smaller mid-range deck and you're about to start dropping haymakers, you might be able to undo the lost tempo you got from playing a pretty bland 2/7 for 4, right? Now, where can you get punished for this is your opponent is quicker and they play a real unit on 4, and you fall behind on board tempo because you're the one that spent the resources for this, right? Your opponent didn't have to spend the resources, and then they start drawing more cards and they're already ahead of you on board. They get more cards and more resources, right? You're both ramping together, and then they start just outpacing you that way. You can also get punished by cards like Beguile, right? You play this, they bounce it, and you were really counting on skipping kind of the next turn and going straight to the 6R turn, things like that. I think there's a lot of cool stuff going on with this card, though. I will say I'm not ready to really pass judgment on this until I play with it, because it is going to be like, I don't think this is one that you can just like guess as to whether or not it's going to be good or bad just from reading it. I think you really need to see play patterns. I think there's going to be certain matchups where maybe this isn't good. Like against 4 flip leaders, I think this is going to be pretty bad. Like imagine you're playing against a Sebulba deck and this is your turn 3. They probably already played 2 units, and then they play like another unit. They flip Sebulba. they hit you for a bunch, and now you're going into the 6R turn. Like, now they can play their entire hand that turn, most likely, because they're an aggro deck, and you've just played a 2/7 on your 4R turn. You're going to fall very far behind, I think, in situations like that. Whether or not it's going to be good with like really big leaders, like the 7+ leaders, like Krennic, for instance, well, it's going to be maybe hard to get back that tempo when you're not even flipping the leader the turn after, but it might be good enough in a Krennic deck because he's going to be making credits. Now you're double ramping with this, and all of a sudden maybe you're just able to capitalize on all these extra resources much better than your opponent does. All in all, tremendously cool card. I expect a lot of people are going to be trying this one, and it should be fun to see how it all turns out. And the next legendary here is the Mandalorian. He is a 6-cost Vigilance Aggression unit. He's a 6/5 Mandalorian bounty hunter with a when played, draw a card. When you draw one or more cards during the action phase, give a shield token to this unit. So, of course, he does immediately give himself a shield token because of his when played. So, it's going to be a 6/5 shielded when he comes in. So, he's pretty good. Like, as a unit, this is pretty powerful. My question, and it's a question I've asked a ton over the last couple years of playing this game, can we afford to play a 6-cost unit that doesn't really do anything when we play him? The answer to date has mostly been no, right? We've mostly only ever played units of this size when they have things like Ambush or Sentinel or some really powerful when played effect. Now, he does have a when played that does something, so it's not like he's a complete blank. Like, we've seen lots of those where it's just like giant unit that comes in that needs to like do something, right? We actually have one in this set in the same colors in Chirrut, who is enormous. He's an 8/6 Saboteur for 6 with an on attack that heals something. Can that be good? Can Mandalorian be good? Can just these chunky units that don't do much? Now, there's a small comparison here that we have with Ki-Adi-Mundi. Actually, that card was sometimes splashed, specifically in Talzin Red, in previous tournaments as a 6-cost unit that came in and drew 2 cards. It was a 4/4, so a much, much worse body than the Mandalorian is for that card draw effect. So I think, like, if you were in the market for something like that, Mandalorian seems probably better because it's giving you like a very significant and difficult to remove threat instead of that extra card that Ki-Adi gives. And getting these extra shields, I don't think it's like completely necessary for this card. There's going to be some leaders like Kylo, for instance, who can just draw a card every turn and just keep putting shields on this. So there are other leaders, of course, that have like ways to generate this, even like the new Jin leader that has a draw effect on her leader side and unit side. There's going to be ways to keep chaining shields. There's, of course, a bunch of cards that draw cards if that's what you're in the market for. And in certain matchups, that might be really effective because if the game slows down a little bit to the point where we are just kind of like bashing a bunch of mid-range units into each other, this is going to do a great job at like breaking parity there because it's kind of unkillable in those matchups if you're able to regenerate those shields. Tack on the card draw, and I think this is a pretty effective unit. I'm going to say it's good, not great. I can't guarantee you that a card like this will see significant competitive play for mostly the same reasons that cards like this in the past have not seen competitive play, and that once you get to these 5, 6, 7+ cost cards, you're usually looking for something that impacts the board pretty substantially, and this really doesn't. But the game is changing, right? I say this a lot in the reviews. I don't know exactly what the pace of play will be, and if the pace of play is such that you can take a turn off to set up like a really large value unit, then this can be that really large value unit. All right, and the last new legendary for the day is Anakin's Pod Racer. This is a 3-cost Cunning Heroism unit. It's a 3/2 vehicle speeder. It's a ground vehicle. It has Ambush. And it says, while attacking, if no other units have attacked this phase, this unit deals combat damage before the defending unit. So it gives it like first strike. It's very similar text to like the Han Solo 7-drop unit that we had in set 1, right? So that with ambush is, of course, a very powerful effect. The clause here of no other units attacking does favor you if you have initiative, because you can dictate that, right? You can't attack with any of your units first, but also your opponent can't have attacked with any units first. So there are a decent amount of restrictions, but when this hits, it's pretty solid, because you can think about it as like a mini open fire that leaves behind a 3-2. And there are a lot of blowout potentials for this, right? You go guy, they go 3 health guy, and you just claim and ambush, and you're like miles ahead of your opponent in that sense. But even when you're not killing what it attacks, if you are able to get that first strike effect from its text, just putting 3 damage into something and then leaving behind a 3-2 unit is also not bad. I've seen some talk about how good this could have been with Quinlan in the previous set. Now, Quinlan is rotating out, but doesn't mean you can't try this out in Eternal with Quinlan. It, of course, would be able to do like 4 damage into 3 drops, or just attack into 2 drops and not die. So there is like a little bit of synergy there, although most 3 drops have 5 health anyway, so it's not like Anakin's Pod Racer would have been slaying all those 3/5s with Quinlan. But, you know, overall, this looks like a pretty solid card to me. Like, a solid role player to have access to. I don't think this always just needs to be your turn 2 play. It might be a pretty effective card in finishing off units like post-claim, where they get like a kill into one of your guys, and then you claim and just finish off their unit with a pretty cheap effect that also leaves behind a unit, right? And that's the important part, is when this succeeds, it's a 2-for-1. And it's not leaving behind a very impressive unit, but it is a unit. It's also a vehicle, which could matter a little bit, specifically for piloting. You can put pilots on this, you can put pilot leaders on it, so it gives you a ground vehicle that you might include in your deck that you might like incidentally also want to pilot. But yeah, this looks like a pretty solid little unit here. All right, next up, we're into the blue-green multicolored cards, and Latsrazi is one great card. This is a 3-cost 2/1 Underworld Bounty Hunter. It has a when play that says give a shield token or an experience token to this unit, then she deals damage equal to her power to an enemy ground unit. So I think usually it'll be an experience, because that also will then make her deal 3 damage to something. But if there's ever something that you can finish off with 2 damage, a 2/1 shielded might be a better deal for you than a 3/2 unshielded unit. This is awesome. Like, just a 3-cost that comes into play and deals 3 damage to something. Like, Death Trooper is a pretty good card in this game, and that's a 3/1 that does 2 damage, basically. I mean, it usually does 2 to itself, so it's like a 3/1 that does 2. This is a 3/2 that does 3. 3 is much better than 2. It has relevant traits. I don't know how relevant they will be in a blue-green deck, but Underworld Bounty Hunter are both supported traits. You have flexibility in this effect as well, right? The shield can matter. If you were ever looking for effects that were good with Gar Saxon, who is rotating out, here's one. You'd definitely be including this. There's actually a few cards you'd probably auto-include from this blue-green shell, like the Leppy Lookout as well, that you can power up a Gar Saxon Eternal deck with. This looks like it's going to be a pretty big staple if blue-green, like, pile is a good archetype, right? Because, yeah, like, this is just a tremendously powerful effect to have. Not much else to say there. Now we're into the blue-red stuff, and this is Baylor Valence. It's a 5-cost 3/6, also an Underworld Bounty Hunter, and it has on attack, draw a card. You may deal damage to a ground unit equal to the number of cards you've drawn this phase. Now, it just, you know, that's not a lot of damage. Cards this phase won't include the regroup phase from the previous turn, so those 2 cards you drew for turn don't count. So, like, at baseline, he's a 5-cost 3/6 on attack, deal a damage, and draw a card. I talked a lot about Mandalorian being kind of slow and clunky. This is much slower and clunkier because this straight up does nothing when you play it, and the stats aren't impressive for a 5 cost. Is a 3/6. And I don't think you're getting too much value from his attacks here. Like, yes, you get a card advantage. If he rides for a few turns, that can certainly be good. Cards like this don't typically ride for a few turns. If you have a lot of synergy for these draws so you can do more damage, that's great, but it's very difficult to pull off because you have to do all your drawing effects before you attack with this unit. Gives your opponent more time to interact with this unit before you actually get your attack off. Overall, this one's not impressing me. All right, now we're into green-yellow multicolored, and this is Millennium Falcon. It's also heroism trait. It's a 2/5 Rebel vehicle transport. Rebel does matter because Rebel matters is going to potentially be a supported archetype, although it's not blue, so it's not really supporting the Jyn Erso leader. On attack, you may give a space unit -2/-0 for this phase. You may give a ground unit +2/+0 for this phase. So it's a lot of text and a lot of good text, but also like a little disjointed, right? For you to get the full value of this, you need to have a ground unit. Your opponent needs to have a space unit, right? So it's like 2 pieces there. But I think the more important part is that it buffs your ground forces, less so the debuffing. Because, you know, you can curve a 2-drop on the ground into this and then potentially get some value trades or push extra damage. It's a little slow, right? Because, you know, you buff one of yours, they can interact with that unit before you get your attack off. But at least it's pumping the attack and not just giving it like raid. So if they want to like attack into it, they're still taking that extra 2. 2/5, I like the 5 health a lot. I don't like the 2 damage a lot because 2 is probably not going to do much brawling in space. Now, it does nerf space units, which means you could attack base and just take less in a racing situation from your opponent. You know, I think this card is okay. I don't think it's like amazing in any sense. I think it could be a solid role player. You really probably going to want a lot of ground. I think the important part here is the pumping of your ground stuff. And since it is a sturdy unit, 5 health on a 3-drop in space means it's not going to be too easy for your opponent to just like get this off the board. So as long as your units on the ground are sturdy, maybe they have shields or they're high health units, things like Gunji, for instance, then you'll have more opportunity to get those buffs off and like actually push that damage that the Falcon is giving you. And the next green-yellow card is Patient Hunter. It's a 4-cost 3/3 bounty hunter. When the regroup phase starts, you may give an experience token to a non-leader unit. If you do, that unit can't ready during this regroup phase. So it is buffing units, but I think the primary mode for this will actually be to put that experience on opponents' units so that they don't ready up. I think buffing one of your own units with an experience but preventing it from readying is a pretty significant cost for an experience token. If you have Max Rebo out, you actually get to do this twice. You can like actually buff one of your own units. They don't ready that regroup phase, but they'll ready up in the next regroup phase. So that's like a pretty cute interaction. Overall, I don't think this card is good. I think you can create like fake game scenarios where this will be good. Like you exhaust one of your opponent's units and then you deal with it that turn, and then they play like their 5-drop, and then you exhaust that one next turn, and then you deal with it. And like this card is just like removing your opponent's units every turn by not letting them ready. I think that's mostly like a fairy tale. This is a 4-cost 3/3. It's going to die to 2-cost units that come out. I maybe as a ground unit that can like exhaust space units. There's some like utility there, but again, the stats here are so poor that I'm gonna find it very difficult to justify including a card like this, right? If they answer this, you've now buffed their units. If you're using it on your own units, forget it. I think that's kind of a trap. It's like a cool effect. I just think it was nerfed too hard in the stats department. And we have another green-yellow card. It's the Max Rebo Band. It's a 1 5 for 3. It's an Underworld Musician. It says when the regroup phase starts, create a credit token. So again, because it's doing it at the regroup phase, Max Rebo would actually synergize with this, giving you 2 credits. But overall, a 1/5 for 3 that's going to make you a credit every turn as long as it's in play is like decent. You should at least get that first credit. It's not going to be super easy to remove this the turn you play it. We're going to see a card later in this review that's very, very similar to this. And this is the better version of it. It is also a 2-color card, and the other one is going to be a 1-color card. But yeah, like, this is like ramp, sort of, right? Like, imagine this was, if this is in play for a few turns, it's kind of like you just played resupply in a sense, and you're just getting a credit every turn. And you know, it's not good stats, and I don't know how much investment you can make into a deck where like so many cards are just like these situational like credit boosters or ramp style cards like this and Max Rebo. Like, this is cool stuff, but like, how much of your game can be just playing these like completely worthless units just so that you can eventually do something worthwhile? And that's something we'll have to kind of parse out as we play. Now we're into the red-yellow card, and the first one is also villainy. It's Interrogation Droid. It's a 2-cost 3/1 Imperial Droid. It says when played, exhaust an enemy unit. If you do, and that unit costs 3 or less, its controller discards a card from their hand. Very solid line of text. Now, this isn't really a 2-drop in the sense of like a card that you play on turn 1. This is not a good turn 1 play. But as like follow-ups, the fact that this can exhaust any unit is pretty nice. Like on turn 2, if you have initiative, you can just exhaust their turn 1 play. They will have to discard a card, right? That's a pretty nice effect. You still get a 3-power unit for the deal. You still have a resource to use. So maybe that kind of scenario, yeah, you'd like to have either 1-drops in your deck or like a 1-cost leader effect, like Dedra, for instance. You know, and this also works late in the game against large units. Of course, you don't get that discard effect, but, you know, having a handy 2-cost exhaust effect that also doubles as like an early game disruption tool and a discard effect is pretty nice. Add in the fact that this is a droid and would be an absolute tremendous hit out of Invisible Hand. Now, Invisible Hand is a green card. You're not talking about it fetching off aspect cards, but we've seen it do it before with like the yellow droid that's a Sentinel. You know, there's some, it would be a pretty strong hit out of Invisible Hand. I just have to call that out. All in all, it's a pretty nice utility card. It likely slants again a little more aggro just because of the colors that it's in. I think this color pair is going to trend more aggressive. And you're going to want to pair this with either like, you know, 1-drops or like on the 4-hour turn, like this plus another card, right? This is not a curve filler. It's like, it is a curve filler. It's not an on-curve card. It's very rare that this will be good on curve because, again, it costs 2 and it's not a good turn 1 play. The next red-yellow card is also villainous. It's Shadow of Stygian Prime. It's an upgrade that gives +0/+0. It says attached to a non-leader unit. An attached unit can't ready. It gains when the regroup phase starts. Deal 2 damage to your base. So this is, it costs 1 more than Frozen and Carbonite, which was basically the same text, right? Can't ready. This does go on ground or space. So it is kind of, in a sense, hard removal, but it, with the downside of upgrade hate knocking it off, and then that's unfortunate for you. But for the added cost of 1 over Frozen and Carbonite, you now also have this effect that this deals 2 damage a turn, basically, to your opponent. If they have Max Rebo out, it's actually going to do 4 damage a turn, which is kind of funny. But, you know, it's pretty expensive. It's not, because it doesn't also exhaust the unit you put it on. They always get that, like, attack on you unless you've put it on a unit they just played that turn. The effect on it, the deal 2 damage, does trend a little more aggro, because controlling strategies don't often care that much about that chip damage early on. But does an aggro deck want to play such a high-costed interactive upgrade that also doesn't prevent that first trade up, for instance, that your opponent might have? Like, they can still use the unit first. You know, it looks pretty situational to me. It's okay. It does give decks some added reach because, 2 damage a turn, right? That part, even if the unit's already ready, does happen. So it's like a 4 cost that deals 2 damage. If you get 4 damage out of it, that could be good, right? Like, I think that's really the main thing here is that if they're not pressuring you and this just rides for a few turns, like at what point are we happy? Like once this gets to 6 damage, 3 turns of it being out, that can be pretty effective, isn't? And as long as the unit that you put it on isn't being like able to trade itself into something and remove itself, right? So likely you only use it once the unit's already exhausted, then this can be, a pretty interesting like sort of finisher for an aggro deck where they get stabilized, but they have no way of like preventing that chip damage, right? The same way like Sabine sometimes would just win games because they would stabilize, but she could get that last 2 points or 3 points of damage just from her leader ability. For a Cause I Believe In was a similar kind of thing, and this is way slower than For a Cause, but it also has like more utility. All right, next we're into yellow-blue, and we have Anakin Skywalker. He's also Heroism. It's a 2-cost, 2/4 Force unit. 2-cost, 2/4 Force is nice. In yellow-blue, I'm not sure how relevant that's going to be. There's not a lot of, at least yet, blue-yellow, like, Force synergy decks. Not in Heroism, at least. Villainy is a different story. It's not really been a supported Heroism color pair for Force, or for really anything. Yellow-blue has basically been the worst color pair in the game. But it also has text. It says, when a friendly unit attack ends, if no other units have attacked this phase, you may return it to its owner's hand. If you do, heal 2 damage from your base. So similar text to that Pod Racer, right? If no unit had attacked, that's you or your opponent, then the unit that's attacking, you can bounce it back to your hand. So if it's Anakin, you can bounce Anakin back to your hand, but it also works for any of the units you would attack with. Now, overall, I think largely this is blank text. It's very rare that I think you're going to want to self-bounce your units, but it happens sometimes if they have powerful when played effects, especially on cheap units. If you need to like reset them because their health is very low, there could be some utility there. It's just a huge tempo loss to waylay your own stuff, right? It's that part of it is going to be pretty fringe in my mind. I think if you want to play this card, you're mostly doing it for the 2/4 Force 2-drop. Which so far I don't think is a particularly enticing stat line or trait type for a yellow-blue deck. If this was in a different color pair, I think certainly we might be looking at it a little closer. Do I think that text pushes it over the top? Not really. I think it's going to be very, very rare that that line of text matters, but I won't say never. All right, now we're into the single aspect stuff, and here is Tantive 4. It's a Vigilance 7-drop, also in Heroism. A 5/8 Rebel Vehicle Capital Ship with Restore 2, and when played, if a friendly unit was defeated, this phase heal 4 damage from your base. I do not think this card is good at all. This is way too expensive for a situational heal 4, right? It's not even a heal 4. One of your units has to die first, right? I think that's a stretch. It has Restore 2, but the unit itself doesn't have Sentinel, which I think is like really the missing piece for a card like this. I don't think this is good to stabilize against aggro because it does absolutely nothing to mitigate the bleeding. It just like heals you a tiny bit, maybe, if one of your units died, and then your opponent just ignores it because it's a big, slow, giant space unit that doesn't have Sentinel. And then, yeah, even if you somehow ready up and get another attack off with it, it's like Restore 2, great. Like, this is a very slow, like, in terms of slow, clunky, do-nothings, this is really up there in slow, clunky, do-nothingness. It's not, I do not think an effect like this is enough at 7 cost. All right, next we have the Conveyex Security Captain. It's a 3-cost, 2/4 Imperial Trooper, also in Vigilance. All the cards currently we're talking about are Vigilance. Just the line of text here. Enemy credit tokens lose all abilities. So it's kind of a hate card for credit strategies. Unfortunately, his stats have gotten gutted so hard to 2/4 that I don't think this card will be good even against credit decks because they'll just kill it for free. And I think that's been kind of usually how hate cards in this game have been designed, is that they suffer too hard on the stats that they end up just not being good at hating out on the strategies that they're supposed to work against. Like even all back to Scanning Officer, which is probably one of the better hate cards we've ever seen for Smuggle, because it like exhausted resources. Even that card hardly saw any play because it was a 2-cost 2/3, and like even when it hit, it was you were kind of spending too much energy putting a really meaningless body into play. And this is a heavily meaningless body. It's a 3-cost 2/4. It is very weak. It doesn't kill the credits, so once they remove this, the credits are still around. Like if it did kill credits or like stole credits, probably justified a little more, but like you can't include a card like this in a main deck, right? And is it good enough? Like how invested in a credit strategy will someone have to be to get completely demolished by this? It's like even against like a Lando deck or a Jabba deck that's like heavily invested in credits, they're still going to play real cards and real units. So you're going to spend your whole turn 2 playing a 2/4, just gonna like play a real unit, and you're gonna fall behind. They'll kill this eventually, get their credits, and yeah, like I don't think this is good enough as a hate card to justify. Like if it was a 3/5 and then it was like an actual unit that like in a regular deck, like 3/5 vanilla is actually not great anymore. We see 3/5 with effects. So like in most games it would be a 3/5 vanilla, but that wouldn't be like so embarrassing that you wouldn't be able to include it. And then in the situations where it would like hit credits, it would be like situational upside. Like, I don't know, maybe 3/5 would be too good for it, but 2/4 is like probably too bad for it. So in the end, I don't think this is going to be that effective as like a credit hater, unless there's like some strategies that legitimately cannot function if this card is on the board. All right, now we're into Command, and we have Combat Exercise, a 1-cost event. It says exhaust a friendly unit. If you do, give 2 experience tokens to it. So, 1 cost to give a unit +2/+2 is slightly above rate. But what makes upgrades useful is that, like, it's fast damage, right? When you put an upgrade on a card, you get to immediately use the card with the upgrade. So you're getting, like, hasted damage, quick damage. Usually when you put power into play, it comes in the form of units that are exhausted, but when you put upgrades into play, it's readied damage. And this kind of undoes all of that. And 1 cost 2/2 is like a unit type, for instance. Like, there are 1 cost 2/2s, and they're not great, right? And exhausting your own unit is a huge cost. If you put this on a Sentinel that doesn't need to attack, like maybe a Lost Wolf, for instance, that could be maybe effective. Maybe on like really cheap leaders with high health, where you can just take a turn off from attacking with them just to buff them, because the rate is good, right? 1 cost for 2 experience is above rate, but I think because of the exhaust, it's just not going to work out. And now we're moving into the aggression cards, and the first one is a Villainous Aggression, 2 cost, 2/4. It's BT1, so we're getting Afra's Droids. It's a 2/4 Underworld droid with an on attack, discard a card from your deck. If it's an aggression card, you may deal 1 damage to a ground unit. So just a pretty solid 2-drop right now. For this ability to trigger, often you're going to need all or the majority of your deck to be red. Since it is a 2-power 2-drop, it's a little less aggressive in terms of pushing damage. But if this free rolls a ping every time it attacks into a ground unit, it makes it pretty efficient, because now it's going to like either get value trades into like 3 health units, or start poking units so that when they try to trade into it, they'll end up dying. It's just a pretty good rate unit, and there's going to be a lot of like competition in this early part of the curve for Red Villain. Actually, there's a decent amount of early drops in this color pair. Will this be one of the better ones? Possibly, but again, I think it's going to demand a large proportion of your deck to be red. So in deck building, we'll see how reliable that ends up being. And here's the other droid, 000, 3 cost, 4/4 Underworld droid. So a 3 cost 4/4 in villainy, that's not new. We've seen them in other colors before with Knight of Ren and General Grievous. This also has a pretty good on attack. It says you may put an aggression card from your discard pile on the bottom of your deck if you do deal 1 damage to each enemy base. So it can kind of attack for 5 as a 3-cost 4/4, which is pretty powerful. Attack for 5 to base, right down into units. This is a little easier to like make work than the other droid, because now it's putting cards back from the discard pile, so you have a little more selection there, especially if you're playing something like Sebulba, who's just going to be putting cards into your discard pile. So even if you're not playing a mono red deck, you should be able to find some red cards there anyway. Also, this trigger is maybe a little less important because it's still just attacking as a 4/4, whereas BT really wants that ping to be a valuable unit, because otherwise it's just like a vanilla 2/4. So, this is very powerful. They're both good cards. This one's probably just a little more impressive. Also, having a 4/4 for 3 in a red aggro deck for villainy is a pretty big get. Before we had General Grievous, but that was blue and didn't really find a home. Knight of Ren also in green didn't find much of a home. Here as a red card, I do expect that 4/4 stat line to be quite relevant, and being able to attack for 5 is tremendous for a unit like this. And now we have Sebulba's Pod Racer, which I alluded to earlier when I mentioned Sebulba during the leader review. It's a 3-cost 3/3 vehicle speeder, so it's a ground vehicle. It says when you discard a card from your deck, you may ready this unit, use this ability only once each round. So let's start off with just saying this is basically a Sebulba locked card. You're not going to play this in a not Sebulba deck, but in Sebulba, because of his leader ability, you can use this effect every turn, right? You can ready this once a turn, and that does include the turn you play it. So let's start with the good here. You have a card that can basically come in ready. It's coming in ready with extra steps, but it comes in ready, and in fact, the Sebulba Leader will actually give it Raid 1 when it's being readied from his leader ability. Once it's a unit, it won't be giving the Raid 1 anymore. But that's pretty nice, which means the turn you play this, it can attack for 4, if, of course, there's nothing in front of it and nothing that kills it before it gets to attack. And then moving forward, after that, it can attack twice per turn, right? It can hit for 3, then Sebulba can ready it, can go in for 4. So it's representing potential for a lot of damage. Specifically against like our space deck that doesn't have ground interaction early, this can absolutely like change math in a tremendous way in your favor, because you're pushing for 4, and then next turn this card alone can attack for 7. So over 2 turns, this can attack for 11 damage on the 4R turn, which is an insane amount of damage. So when this is undisturbed, it's a ton. Cards that there have been like a lot of very powerful cards that like come in ready that have been like meta staples, things like Cassian and Millennium Falcon in the past. And this isn't quite on the level of that, and it also takes in an extra action because those cards just came in ready when you like smuggled or played the Falcon. This is not coming in ready. You have to use Sebulba's ability, so it's like one extra step before you get to attack. But those cards represented very powerful effects, not just on curve, but also as sort of like surprise damage later in the game. Your opponent exhausts out by playing some removal or some big unit, and then all of a sudden you can like get in quick damage, which has been a staple of like aggressive heroism decks for a long time. And now villainy, specifically villainy Sebulba, has that potential. So this card isn't just for like turn 2. It's not all it's going to be used for. It's going to be sort of like a late game play too, where your opponent like stabilizes with something, but then you can play this and push for 4 damage immediately, which is nice. Let's talk about the downsides though, because there's a big one, and it's a 3/3 for 3, and that is a major issue for a card like this. Especially on the ground, right? Like Falcon was an overstated space unit, which is like kind of what pushed it over the edge. This is an understated ground unit. There's going to be turn 1 plays that can simply kill this. And of course, most of the turn 2 plays on the ground these days are like 3/5s and 3/4s. So they can value trade it, which is a problem for an aggro deck. So, like, think about it this way. You play it on turn 2, even though, let's say your opponent started with a 2/4, or they have a 3 power unit, but it already attacked. So you get to play this, you get to ready it and hit for 4. But then your opponent's next turn is going to be first action to kill this with their 3-drop. It's a 3/5, and just value kill it. And what you got for your trouble is 4 damage, which is kind of like playing for a cause I believe in on turn 2, which is not something Sabine decks ever wanted to do, right? It was like a not efficient board play to just like burn your opponent for 4 damage and then not advance your board state. And in this is like not exactly that, because your opponent did have to spend an action to kill it with some unit, but it's close to that because you've given up your board just to push that damage. And the 3 health here is a major liability for this card, because it's on the ground specifically. If it was in space, it would be a bit of a different story, but the ground gets gummed up by value units all over the place these days. And that's, not great. Add in the fact that it's basically a Sebulba locked card, there's only going to be like one possibility for it, right? Which is a Sebulba deck is good enough. This card is important enough as sort of like a reach card, because I do think in many cases this is not going to be a good turn 2 play unless you're playing it against space decks or against like control decks, or maybe against these decks making like credit units like 1/5s on turn 2, and then all of a sudden, yes, like they're wasting all this time playing Max Rebo's Band and Max Rebo, and before you know it, they've taken 11 damage from this card and, are going to die because all they did was nothing. And this can really punish those kinds of openings. And it can also really help you with closing out games, especially post interaction. So like, it's a decent card. It's got this major flaw in it. I think if you're making a curve in your deck, and you might not want to consider this as part of your turn 2 reliable units, right? 000, the droid we just talked about, yeah, like that counts. Like that's always going to be a good turn 2 play, basically. But this won't always be a good turn 2 play. So you don't want it to, like, if you're only playing like 9 3-drops and 3 of them are this, that might be a little bit of an issue. So, if you're into Sebulba, you're probably going to want this in your pool of cards. It's just, I don't want to like overrate it just because the stats are a big issue on it, the health specifically. And then the next red card is Attack from All Sides. It's an event. 3 costs is deal 3 damage to a unit. If there are 4 or more different aspects among friendly units, you may deal 5 damage to that unit instead. So the kicker here, the getting 5 damage is not going to be easy. 4 aspects means you have to have an off aspect card in play. So we're talking either like the leaders like Hera or Callus, or we're talking about using these splash bases. But in those cases, you have to like probably use it early, because this is like an early game removal style card, which means you're kind of cashing in that base early, and then that unit also needs to like survive long enough for you to fire this off to get that 5, right? So the 5 here, it's effective. I mean, 3 for 5 is good, but it's not like game ending good, and it's a lot of hoops to jump through to get this to trigger. So we have to look at the baseline of it, which is 3 cost deal 3, and I don't think that's good enough, because we also have cards like Let's Call It War, which always does 3 to something, and sometimes also an extra 2. You have Piercing Shot in the game, which is a 3 cost deal 3. First it defeats all the shields on the unit and then deals 3, right? So you have these different versions of 3 cost red removal that all deal 3 damage and then all have like an extra upside. But I think the upside here is probably too difficult to be reliable outside of maybe like a Hera deck if you're playing her in red. And even then, it's not super easy to have 4 aspects, right? That's at minimum 2 units, but that's only if they differ in their aspects. It's sometimes going to mean 3 units. So, I don't love this removal card, but it's interesting and it might see some play. All right, next we're into Cunning, and the first is the Master Codebreaker. He's a 2-cost, 1/4 Underworld unit. It says the first Gambit card you play each round costs 1 less. When played, search the top 8 cards of your deck for a Gambit card, reveal it, and draw it. This is very similar to the Jabba from previous rotation, right? He was searching up Underworld, not Underworld, trick cards and making them cost less. So the question is Gambits, right? And pre-rotation, there are actually a lot more. Post-rotation, there's not a lot of good ones yet. There's 2 I'll call out. One is Faith in Your Friends, and that's probably the best one that you can do because now that card costs 1. You, of course, need to be in a heavy yellow heroic deck to make it work, but that's a good one. The other is the Axe Forgets, which is the new mini Waylay, the one that costs 2 but only bounces units that cost 3 or less. Now it would cost 1 and do it. That's decent. Now the unit itself is not competitive in stats. A 1/4 is not a good stat line. It's also only letting you do the first Gambit card you play each round for 1 less, although I don't know how many times you'd want to play more than that. To reliably get this to go off, like the Jabba number for me was always like I wanted at least 8 or so tricks, and you would still miss about like 1 out of 5 times. I think this is actually worse when it misses, because Jabba, I know it was a 2/8, doesn't seem like a relevant stat line, but in the deck that it was played, it always had hot shot blasters, so it actually sometimes was a relevant threat in play, whereas I don't see Master Codebreaker ever being a relevant threat in play, so I think it's even more necessary to get the hit on the card draw, so you might even be talking like 10 Gambits in the deck, and right now, there just aren't good enough cards to justify that. But doesn't mean there won't be. And, Faith in Your Friends alone is a very nice trigger for this. Especially like you do this on turn 2, you can play him and Faith in Your Friends together. It's a pretty powerful 3-cost to play. So, we'll have to keep tabs on the Gambits moving forward. Next, we have Lady Proxima, 3-cost, 1/5, Underworld, action, exhaust, create a credit token. So the slightly worst version of Max Rebo's band, but this is only in Cunning, which means non-yellow green decks can play it. The review is basically the same, though, is like, yes, this can be pretty efficient at like ramping you, but how much of your deck can be devoted into these like blank units, essentially, that all they do is like progress your credit stock or your resource stock. If you're going to play in green, you're going to default to the other one. Will you play both? I don't know. It's a lot of 1/5s in a deck. So, yeah, like, I'm not going to say much new here. The card's very similar to Max Rebo's band. All right, next we have Improvise. It's a 1-cost event. It is a Gambit. It says, look at the top card of your deck. You may play it. It costs 1 less. If you don't, you may discard it. Without the Master Codebreaker out, you're paying 1 to play the top card of your deck for 1 less, which means you're not even getting a resource saving. You're just like hoping to spike something. We don't have a lot of ways to like stack the top card of our deck right now. So like, unless your hand is complete nonsense, you're just gonna like, why would you ever do this? With the Master Codebreaker, you are now getting a 1-cost discount on the card because this costs 0. The problem is, again, it's just a random card. So, like, even if there was a way to stack your deck, I don't know if you would ever want to go through the trouble of including a card like this for that, like, exact situation where you both Master Codebreaker, have Improvise, and were able to stack your deck, and you go through all this trouble and you get a 1 resource discount. So, this card doesn't seem good at all to me. And next we have Scavenging Sandcrawler, 4-cost, 1/7 vehicle transport. On attack, you may put a card from your discard pile on the bottom of your deck if you do create a credit token. So on and on we go with these like units that are basically not actually units. They're just like once a turn credit generators. This one looks even worse to me than the like Proxima. Not that I think Proxima is necessarily bad. It's just this is a turn later and it's still only doing 1 credit a turn. The 1/7, great. We got 2 health on our credit generator. At some point, your opponent's going to have to decide if it's even worth engaging with these units because they have so much health that like that might be a trap. Maybe you just kill your opponent before these things matter enough. But if you're into like this idea of like spending 2, 3, 4 turns just like amassing credits and then playing something that costs 14 resources, maybe there's a world where you just play all of these things and just play something enormous with all these credits. Next, we have Transmission Jamming, a 1-cost event. Name a card. Cards with that name can't be played this phase. So it's a guessing game, kind of. I mean, there are ways to look at your opponent's hand. You have Thrawn here on the picture, and he with his original leader, would have known some of the cards in his opponent's hand. But, we have these like guess cards, right? We have Garindin, who he names a card, but if you hit, you discard it. Now, and you also get a body. Now, it costs 2, right? The idea here is that this costs 1, and it's just to like prevent some very important piece of interaction for 1 turn. And I don't think this is going to be good enough, honestly. I think like heroic decks will probably just play like Jam Communications, which is, you get to look at your hand, take an event or something out of it. Villainy decks, I mean, they have Grindin, might have some other effects that actually get to like specifically target cards. The saving grace here is that this is so cheap that it can kind of just like curve fill whenever you want. But I'm not sure like what kind of scenario we can use something like this to just like hope to spike something. And even if we've managed to look at our opponent's hand, unless there's only like one thing they can play, spending a card and a resource is a pretty big cost to prevent it, right? It's not just that you're paying a resource, you're also spending a card, including a card in your deck to do this. And next, 3-cost Champions KT9 Pod Racer. It's a 2/3 vehicle speeder. When played, create a credit token. So on and on and on and we go with these credit generators. This one actually seems maybe a little like better just because, at least you have 2 power on this unit, and you also get the credit immediately. So it's instead of like Lady Proxima, it's a 1/5, and then you have to wait a turn to get that credit. You just get it immediately, and if Proxima wasn't going to die, she was going to give you that 1 credit too. But will this 2/3 potentially provide more value than the 1/5 after that? Maybe this actually gets to trade with something or cause like enough damage on a unit that something else will effectively finish it off. Like there's maybe more use to this. Maybe there isn't. Not entirely sure. But one thing I can tell you, we're not going to be like short of units that make or generate credits. You're going to have options in a lot of places. And this is just another one of them. And, maybe there's cards that like re-trigger this, right? We've seen Rio Durant that would be able to flip this back into your hand and replay it with a shield, and you get that credit token again. Anakin from this set, right, would be able to bounce this back to your hand if it gets to attack. So there are like maybe ways to get more out of it. All right, that's it for this card review. Let me know what you think of these. Interested to hear your thoughts. I'll be back likely next week with another batch of them. Super excited for the set. That's it for today. Until next time, take care.